everyone, this is Denise from Liquid Color, and today I have another product review for you. The incredibly kind people over at Graham sent me some watercolors to review for you all. Even though I did receive these products in order to review them for my channel, my comments and opinions on the paints are my own and they are unbiased. I've even spent an extra couple days with these paints as I wanted to be able to give you a very well-rounded review rather than just a first impressions look at these paints. So thank you once again to Graham for sending these over. I've had a lot of fun with these paints so far, and let's jump into our review. First off, I want to tell you a little bit about Graham. This is a small company based out of Oregon in the United States. They were founded a little over 20 years ago, and they're dedicated to creating exceptionally pigmented colors by milling them in small batches here in the United States. Another important component about their company that caught my eye is that they strive to be as eco-friendly as possible. Some of you may or may not know, before I was a full-time artist, I was an environmental zoo educator, so I'm always incredibly happy to support eco-friendly companies wherever possible. So a couple things about the eco-friendly company of Graham that I found on their website is that they use natural oil and recycled rags to clean their equipment, and when they do use water, they use recycled water. They reduce their energy need for operations as much as possible by using timers and other like methods, and 100% of their power is through renewable power sources. According to their website, their production waste is only 1% compared to the industry average of 3%. So all those are really great things. I was excited to hear that. And for you other eco nerds out there that may be watching, I just wanted to include that information for you real quick. So back to the paints themselves, as I swatch out the colors for you, you're going to be able to see how rich and vibrant and heavily pigmented they are, and I was really impressed by this quality. If you're an artist who prefers muted colors, I'll have to say right away that these probably aren't the paints for you, but if you do love colors, stay tuned for the rest of this review. One thing that Graham is known for with their paints is that they're produced using honey, which keeps their paints very soft and ready to paint even when they're dried in a palette. So I did put these paints in an open palette when I got them. That was a couple days ago, and they set up, but as soon as you touch water to them, they are ready to go. They re-wet incredibly easily. On the flip side, many artists report that the paints are too fluid to travel with. Now, the colors that they sent me, I didn't have this problem. I've tilted them upside down, I've looked for them moving in the tray, and I haven't seen that. Perhaps if you left them there for a long time on an edge, maybe they would start to slope down, but for my purposes in traveling, I don't think I would have any trouble with them. However, if you are a plein air painter, you might want to look into that, especially with the cobalt colors. They didn't send me any cobalt, so I can't give you my personal opinions on that, but from a lot of other plein air painters that I've seen, they have said their cobalts are quite runny, which is part of the paint properties, not necessarily of Graham's treatment of them. So these are the colors that they sent me to review. The palette of colors includes transparent red iron oxide, nickel quinacridone gold, Hansa yellow, azo orange, naphthol red, quinacridone rose, dioxazine purple, ultramarine blue, and phthalo blue. They also included one of their brochures, and they'll send this to anyone that asks for it. All you have to do is email them. I'll put the link in the description below, and it has their full line of 70 colors. Now the brochure is a little bit big. I'll try and feed it through the camera here so you can see it. But their 70 colors have pigment information listed underneath them. So it has their pigment number, what their light fast rating, their transparency rating, and then also whether or not they stain or granulate. They do have an interesting kind of system here for their, let's see if I can show it here, for their stains and sedimentary codes. It's either rated as staining or granulating, and that's it. They don't have a staining quality and then also whether or not they granulate like some other companies do. And I'll kind of touch on that a little bit later in the video. So let's go ahead and we're gonna dive right in, and I'll swatch out some colors so you can see how vibrant and beautiful these paints are. All right, we're gonna go ahead and take a look at our paints here. I have them all laid out in this open palette that I had lying around the house to put the 9 colors that they sent me in. So this first color here, and you can see how easily it re-wets out of the palette. It's like instantly ready to go. This is their transparent red iron oxide, and I think it's one of their kind of substitutes for burnt sienna. The company also carries a burnt sienna, but I believe from the pictures that are in the brochure that it's a little bit more on the brown side. This is very close to the Winsor Newton burnt sienna, and it's made from PR101 rather than PBR7. Next we have the nickel quinacridone gold. Now quinacridone gold is a favorite amongst many watercolors, but it's been discontinued in most lines or reformulated, and that's because of the scarcity of the pigment that's left. Daniel Smith, I believe, is the only company that still has a large store of the original pigment. This is, like it addresses in the name, which I really appreciate, is made from a nickel yellow component. It's made from PO48 and PY150. So that PY150 is this yellow you see here when you fade it out to a lighter color. And it's more full-bodied version, it's more like a very deep yellow ochre that fades to a yellow. Next up we have Hansa Yellow. Now this is the equivalent of Hansa Yellow Light in some of the other manufacturers. It's PY3, and it's a very, very cool, like a lemon yellow. And then rather than a warm yellow in the palette like I have in my normal palettes, we have an orange here. This is the Azo Orange. Now, I don't have orange in my main palettes because I prefer to mix oranges, and you can get beautiful oranges from the other reds and yellows that they sent me here. Although this is a nice convenience color. It's pretty middle of the road. It doesn't seem to lean too far one way or the other, meaning it doesn't lean too red or too yellow. And it's made from PO62. Next we have Napthal Red, and that is pigment number PR112. Now this would be a replacement for, like, I have a Pyrrole Red in my main palette, or a Winsor Red, and that's made from PY254. And this color I actually like a lot better. I was really excited to try it out. It's very vibrant and clear, and in its full strength, these M-Gram paints are just so vibrant. It's definitely a fire engine red type of color, and it has great coverage over the page. For our cool red in the palette, we have a quinacridone Rose. And this is our red that leans a little more towards purple. And it also has great coverage on the paper. This is a very popular color for palettes. It's made out of PV19 is the pigment color name, and it's great for making these really clear, vibrant purples. Speaking of purples or violets, we have dioxazine purple here. I have the equivalent in the Winsor Newton color as the dioxazine violet is what they call their color. It's a very, very, very deep purple. And I would say that it's either kind of a mid-tone or it leans slightly more blue rather than more red. And it's made from PV23. I'm going to move this over just a little bit so my hand has some room to swatch out our colors here. We have ultramarine blue, and I have a couple things to mention about this color. It's made from the same pigment that every other ultramarine blue is made out of, the PB29, and it granulates more than the other colors. But one thing I do want to mention when I was kind of testing these out is that the M-Gram paints don't seem to granulate as much as my other pigments do, including this ultramarine blue. It's very beautiful. It has great coverage, just like all their other paints. It re-wets beautifully, but even though it does granulate some, it doesn't granulate as heavily as my Daniel Smith colors. So that's just something to note, that if you're an artist that really enjoys granulation, that again, just like people who like muted palettes, this might not be the company for you. I actually happen to like non-granulating pigments a lot. I like how smooth and beautifully they flow over the paper. So I don't mind that they don't granulate, but that is something to note in case that's something that you're looking for. And lastly, we have their phthalo blue. Phthalo blue is always a gorgeous shade. It's very heavily staining, doesn't lift very easily. And their version of this color, I feel, is they have a red shade that's separate from this one that I have. Usually phthalo blue comes in a green shade and a red shade, but I still feel like this is slightly more red than my other phthalo blue from Daniel Smith's. I happen to love this color. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. Hey guys, so once again, my color mixing segment turned out to be a little longer than I had hoped it would be, so I'm going to go ahead and do a voiceover on this part so that I can tell you a little bit about the colors while speeding up the filming process. So the first combination here is the phthalo blue and the nickel quinacridone gold, and you can see it turns into a beautiful sappy green color when they're mixed together. And if you mix it with a little bit more blue, it's more of a vibrant green, and if you mix it more with the gold, it's kind of like a deep goldish olive green color. The second mixture is going to be ultramarine blue with a quinacridone gold, and this turns into, if you use a lot of yellow, it's a very yellowish, like olive green color, or almost a brown, versus if you use more of the blue, it turns into this deep sap green color, which I really enjoyed as well. Then we have our ultramarine blue with our Hansa yellow, and because this is a warm blue and a cool yellow, it is going to make kind of a muddier version of a brighter green. It's not quite as olive colored, it's definitely more towards the sap. And if you add more blue, it turns into a relatively bright blue-green color. But our phthalo blue here with the Hansa yellow light is going to create our most vibrant green colors out of our combinations. You will need more of the yellow to combine because the phthalo blue is so heavily pigmented, but it will create this very vibrant shade of green. If you add even more of the blue, it'll be a very deep, almost like a phthalo turquoise color, which is really neat to be able to mix from the colors in the palette. Next up, we're going to do a couple of the violet colors with the ultramarine, and first we're going to use our quinacridone rose, which is closer to violet. So this is going to be the most vibrant, clear purple that we can get. And you can see when you have a lot of red in there that it's a very bright red-violet, and if you add more of the blue, it is still an equally as bright, clear purple color. And then when we mix it, the same ultramarine with our naphthol red, it's going to be like a deeper, murkier purple color, and on the redder side, it's still going to be a very vibrant red, red-violet, but if you add more blue, it'll be an almost black shade of violet, which is really handy if you are trying to get darks and shadows and everything. You can tell through this whole video how easy it is to mix the colors on paper, and I think that has a lot to do with the viscosity of the paint and the fact that it has honey in it and it's easy to re-wet. So I just wanted to point that out too if you hadn't noticed already. Here we're going to try and mix that neutralized gray color with the transparent red iron oxide and the ultramarine. And this is a classic combination when we're talking about burnt sienna and ultramarine. It makes a shade called James Gray. Now this more orange version of the red iron oxide doesn't quite neutralize as well as the burnt sienna if we're talking like completely neutralized between blue and orange, but it does make some nice varied gray tones, which are pretty nice to look at. Alright, so here we have an opacity and transparency test for you that I did yesterday. I used Winsor & Newton India ink to, Cricket, this is not your time. I used the India ink to paint a nice thick line of black pigment on my paper, and then I painted the watercolors over the top of them, and that'll help tell you how transparent they are. So if you look at the quinacridone rose, you cannot tell, even if you're looking very closely, it's incredibly hard to tell for either of these two colors that there's any paint over the black line at all. For the blues, you can tell that there's paint over them, but because they're so dark, it doesn't make too much of a difference. But if we look up here at our warm colors, you can definitely see that there's a film over the top of that black line. Now in the brochure that they include with all of their listings, they do give transparency ratings, and all of these were rated transparent except for the Hansa Yellow, which is listed as semi-transparent. I'm not really sure why. I think that the Hansa Yellow and the Azo Orange are both the same level of transparent or opaque. So if we're going to call the Hansa Yellow semi-transparent, we should also call the Azo Orange semi-transparent. But the Naphtha Red is even more opaque than either of the other two colors. Now I tried to be as fair as possible by putting the same amount of pigment on each painting strip here, and I'm just a little confused as to why they'd rate this one as transparent. I definitely think it should be at least semi-transparent, if not semi-opaque. So I don't know if that's a typo or just the way that they rated it, but that's just my personal opinion. That's not uncharacteristic of this shade of red though. A lot of the warm reds are going to be very opaque compared to other watercolor colors. That's nothing to be said bad about this, this paint. I'm just not sure why they labeled it that way. I also did a lifting test. You can see the little white lines here, was when I took a damp flat brush and then rubbed it over the dried paint. Now this is on the Canson paper, and they all actually lifted really, really well, even the staining colors. So even down here for Phthalo Blue, I was able to pull up some of the paint. However, I was thinking, oh, maybe this is just because it's Canson paper, it's student grade, and the paints don't set in as well. So I did a second test on my Arches paper. This is just a scrap of Arches paper, and you can see, let's see if I can put them side by side. You can see that it is harder to lift off of the Arches because the Arches, being an artist quality cotton rag, is much more absorbent than the Canson paper. So the paints are harder to lift off of them, and then here we see that the Phthalo Blue, you could barely lift it off at all. So the liftability, which is not any kind of rating that they have in their brochure, but just for artists that like to do lifting, if you like to lift clouds out of the background or want to sop up paint that you accidentally put down somewhere, these are just things to note. Now I believe that the reason why these are so hard to lift off the paper is because they are so heavily pigmented, which is a huge pro, right? Because it's great that the paints are so dense and pigmented and have such great coverage. But if you're a painter that likes to be able to lift colors, again, just like the people who like muted colors or who like to travel with really solid pans, these might not be for you. I did want to do a practical application. So many of you are probably familiar with my other video where I painted this lovely rhino. Hopefully you can see that without too much glare. And that was Daniel Smith in Mission Gold paints. So I painted the same image, or very similar image, of the rhino with these paints. Now they aren't the exact same colors, and I didn't spend quite as much time on this one, but I did use Arches paper and my nice high quality brushes to see how the comparison would be. And just to give you my thoughts on it, I think that they performed really well. Again, when you're using the phthalo blues to try and do a technique where you, let me see if I can show you. When you add a pigment to the paper, I like to do this thing where if I'm doing like a shadow or something, I kind of roll up with a damp wet brush and pull up the edges of the paint so that it fades off and it makes a nice shadow. Now if you look really closely here, you can still see the line where the red I put down versus a nice clean white paper. So if that's a technique that you enjoy using, just note that because of the high pigment concentration in these paint, that it will be harder to get those really clean edges when you lift the paint. That being said, for a more painterly look where you want to see all the brush strokes, if you look in closely here, you can see a lot of texture, which can be nice as well. For this painting, I used most of the colors. I used the Hansa Yellow, the Azo Orange, the I don't remember which red. I think I actually used both reds for two different shades of purple. And I used mostly the Phthalo Blue to mix the deep purples, but I did put in some ultramarine highlights here. It was harder. I overpainted this front horn, and it was harder to lift the colors back off to retain some of my whites. That's a painter mistake. Like, I shouldn't have put that much pigment, but with some of my other paints I'm able to kind of correct those, whereas I did have a more difficult time with this. Overall though, I really like how heavily pigmented the paints are. They make beautiful, beautiful colors. I'm really excited to do a full color chart where I mix every color by every other color, and I can share that with you if you'd like in another video. I was just overall really, really happy with the quality of these paints and from the kindness of the company to send them out to be reviewed. These are absolutely a paint that I will continue to use as a studio paint here at home. I don't have any plans to put them into a travel palette, but I really enjoy them here, and I look forward to picking up some new colors in the future to round out my palette. I'd love to hear from you if you've used Ingram paints before. Leave some comments below about your experiences with them. And if you'd like to see more product reviews in the future, please be sure to like and subscribe and let me know what kind of content you'd like to see. I'd love to provide more demonstrations for you and product reviews, and just let me know what you'd like to see out of the channel. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.